My name is Cassidy Wynn, and if you've never been to a family funeral that feels more like a corporate takeover meeting, consider yourself lucky. My father, James Wynn, passed away 3 days ago. No tears, no long speeches, just a cold draft of air conditioning, a will being read over lukewarm hotel coffee, and my sister Leona holding court like a CEO on bonus day. She didn't even look at me when I walked into the room. That's how things have been since I enlisted. I wasn't the daughter with the law degree, the investment firm, or the penthouse in Manhattan. I was the one who wore boots and saluted for a living. "Cassidy," she said flatly, like she was reading my name off a grocery list. "Didn't expect you to show up all the way from wherever you're stationed these days." "Ramstein Air Base," I answered. She nodded like I just told her I work at a gas station. Then she turned back to the attorney, already checking something off on her legal pad. Probably my name off the asset distribution list. Dad's will was short, too short, suspiciously clean. Leona was listed as primary executive. She would manage all remaining real estate, investments, and family accounts. I got a sealed envelope and a thank you for my service. The envelope had a single Post-it note stuck to it. "Your father admired your discipline. He wanted you to have this." Inside was his old military challenge coin from the Korean War and a photo of him standing next to a fighter jet in 1975. That was it. No house, no savings, not even the watch he used to wear every day. To Leona, I was the decoration, a uniform at the funeral for optics. She even made a comment about it. "I hope you're not planning to wear that full getup on the flight home," she said, as we stood at the check-in counter in Lisbon Airport. "It's my uniform," I replied. "Sure," she smirked. "And I suppose it comes with a little respect me button on the collar. If I weren't used to that tone, it might have stung." But I was. That's how it always was with her. Snide comments dressed as jokes, condescension sugar-coated in sisterly concern. We boarded our flight, Skybridge 3072 to Denver with a layover in the Azores business class. Not my choice. Leona booked it, said we had to fly together because it would look strange otherwise. She sat by the window, of course. I took the aisle, between us an empty seat. I figured even that much space wasn't enough to void her attitude. And I was right. "You know," she said after takeoff, sipping her Chardonnay, "Dad really wanted us to work together. I think he hoped you'd eventually grow out of the military thing and come home." "I didn't know being stationed overseas was a personality flaw," I said. She gave a little laugh. "It's just some people use the army to escape. Others use it to avoid growing up and one stick." That was her way of calling me a coward without actually saying the word. Classic Leona. I turned to the in-flight entertainment screen and scrolled through the movies. Not because I wanted to watch anything, but because I needed an excuse not to look at her. She went quiet for a bit. I thought that was it. Then she leaned in and dropped this one. "You do know you're no longer in the will, right?" I froze. She smiled real slow. "The mental health clause. It disqualifies beneficiaries with unresolved psychological records." I stared at her. "What are you talking about?" "Oh, Cassidy." She sighed dramatically. "Remember that eval after Syria? The 3 months of mandatory leave. It's not personal. It's legal." That's when it clicked. She dug through my military records. She'd found my lowest moment and used it to push me out of my father's legacy. "You leaked my evaluation?" I asked quietly. "I shared it with the estate attorney," she said, "to protect the family's interests. You're still family, of course." That wasn't concern. That was calculated sabotage. Right then, I realized something. This flight was more than just a trip home. It was the final stage of a silent war my sister had been fighting against me for years. I just hadn't been paying attention, but I was now like where this intense flight with old wounds is going. Drop a comment if you've ever had family drama on a plane and hit that subscribe button for more wild story breakdowns like this one. She ordered another drink, called the flight attendant by her first name like they were old friends, and laughed at something on her phone. I stared out the window, not at the clouds, but past them. I wasn't angry. I was done being angry at Leona. I was calculating, there's a difference. I thought about Dad's coin, the fighter jet, his silence at the end. Maybe he knew. Maybe that coin wasn't a gift. It was a message. I slid it from my pocket and gripped it in my hand just as the seatbelt sign dinged. Somewhere over the Atlantic at cruising altitude with Leona smirking in seat 14 Ampere. The first turbulence hit. No one paid much attention. At first, the first jolt made Leona spill her wine. She looked down, cursed under her breath, and pressed the call button with the kind of irritation only people used to getting their way can produce. I didn't flinch. Turbulence doesn't scare me. Unchecked egos and window seats, that's a different story. The flight attendant came over quickly, polite but clearly busy. "We're hitting a little bit of chop, ma'am. Would you like a napkin or a towel?" Leona didn't answer right away. She gave the woman a tight smile, then gestured toward her stained blouse like she expected her to produce a dry cleaner on the spot. "Whatever you have, and maybe less bouncing next time." The attendant, to her credit, didn't roll her eyes. She handed over a napkin and moved on. I would have applauded if I wasn't worried Leona would take it personally. The lights dimmed slightly. Outside, the sun dipped behind a stretch of clouds that looked like burnt cotton. I shifted in my seat, tugged the edge of my jacket straight, and tried to settle in. But Leona wasn't done. Of course not. She pulled out her iPad, opened an email with bold red letters, and tilted it just enough for me to see without actually handing it over. Got final confirmation from the trust attorney. She said, "It's done. I'm assuming you won't contest." I didn't respond, mostly because I wasn't sure whether I wanted to scream or laugh. She continued like she was leading a board meeting. "The Valence Trust is being folded into my firm. I'll manage it for now. Unless, of course, you've got experience with managing multi-state asset portfolios while flying jets over conflict zones." I turned to face her fully. "You actually think you're the only one in this family who understands structure?" I asked. She smirked. "I think I'm the only one who didn't abandon it." That one stung, but I didn't let her see it. Leona always made it sound like I ran away from home at 18 and never looked back, which is almost true, except she never asks why. She doesn't remember the night Dad yelled at her for messing with the estate accounts, and I took the blame to keep him from cutting her off. She doesn't remember the hours I spent driving Mom to chemo while she sat in her LSAT prep class pretending none of us existed. She doesn't remember because she doesn't want to. There's something suffocating about flying next to someone who thinks they've won a war you weren't even fighting. I looked out the window again, pretending to be fascinated by the ocean below. The plane cut through a narrow cloud bank. The seatbelt light blinked on again, and the captain's voice came over the speaker. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've hit a bit of turbulence. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened." Leona gave a theatrical sigh. You'd think a first-class flight could afford a smoother ride. I ignored her. Across the aisle, a man in his 40s wearing a Denver Nuggets hoodie looked pale. His hands clenched the armrests. Next to him, his teenage daughter was quietly crying into a travel pillow. Nerfs. Understandable. What wasn't understandable was how people like Leona could coast through life thinking everything should bend to them. People like her didn't just climb ladders, they pulled them up behind them. "Does this kind of thing happen a lot?" she asked, glancing at me like I was an airline employee. "Turbulence?" "Yes," I said. "Your attitude also?" "Yes," she rolled her eyes. "You're in a mood. I'm in a cabin with you. There's a difference." She opened her mouth to respond, then stopped. She called me a toy soldier. Another jolt rocked the plane, this time hard enough to shift our overhead bins. A few clicks and slams followed. Someone yelped further back. A baby started to cry. The flight attendants began walking faster, checking belts, calming passengers. Leona suddenly looked less smug. "I swear," she muttered. "If this becomes a thing, it already was a thing. I could feel it, not just turbulence." Something was off. Years in the air had trained me to spot patterns. How metal vibrates, how wind interacts with fuselage. This wasn't routine. The engines winded, then dipped, then recalibrated again. Not normal. I glanced toward the cockpit. No movement. A sharp bang echoed from the tail section, followed by what sounded like a mechanical hiccup. People gasped. The cabin lights flickered once. That's when I felt it in my gut. We weren't dealing with a bumpy ride. The smell of burnt plastic was faint at first, just enough to make you wonder if it was in your head. Leona wrinkled her nose and looked around like someone had dared to use an aerosol in her presence. I knew that smell wiring. Possibly as short, possibly worse. A soft chime rang out overhead, then silence. No announcements, no crew moving, just that hum of every passenger realizing at the same time that something wasn't quite right. Leona finally turned to me. Should they be saying something? I didn't answer. My brain was already running checklists. The tone shift in the engine, the vibration changes, that faint chemical smell, none of it added up to routine turbulence. Still, I wasn't in uniform. I wasn't in control. I was just another passenger, so I waited. Then came the whine. A pitch shift in the right engine, high, drawn out, mechanical, and then a sudden pop. Not a loud explosion, but a sharp, gut-punching sound that made the whole cabin flinch. The lights dimmed again. This time they didn't come back on immediately. A baby started screaming. A few passengers gasped or cursed. Then came the voices from the back. Did you hear that? What was that? Is that normal? Spoiler. It wasn't. He leaned forward slightly, trying to see toward the cockpit. No crew, no announcements, nothing. Leona was pale now, her bravado cracking at the edges. I don't like this, she muttered. I opened my mouth to respond, but then Ammon 2 rows ahead stood up, turning to face the cabin crew. Excuse me, is everything all right? Something's wrong with the engine. The flight attendant tried to calm him, saying it was just turbulence and asking him to remain seated. He didn't look convinced. Neither was I. That's when Leona whispered the line that still echoes in my skull. This is exactly why I don't trust flying with amateurs. I turned to her. What? She shrugged, pulling her designer shawl tighter. Budget airlines, ex-military pilots who think combat hours are the same as passenger flights. It's all just for show. I stared at her. She glanced at my face and smirked. No offense. I mean, you're technically one of them, aren't you? A toy soldier with a joystick? Only difference is your targets don't shoot back. You think being a combat pilot is a game? She waved a hand. I think it's theatrical. You didn't choose military life. You ran to it because you couldn't win at real life. So you put on a uniform and let other people tell you what to do. Every word came with that same bitter flavor, like she was chewing old envy and trying to spit it at me. I didn't answer. I couldn't. Not because she was right, she wasn't, but because I'd heard this tone before, at family dinners, at estate meetings, at every single interaction where Leona needed to be the smartest, most competent person in the room. Even if the room was 40,000 FT in the air and losing pressure, the plane dipped slightly, not sharply, but enough for when the engine exploded at 40,000 feet every stomach to drop just a little. People started whispering louder. Theman in the Nuggets hoodie was openly praying now. Then, finally, the intercom clicked on. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your first officer speaking. We're experiencing a minor technical issue with one of our engines. We are currently assessing the situation and will provide more information shortly. Please remain calm and seated with your seatbelts fastened. Leona scoffed. Minor technical issue. Did they train that line at the same place they teach you to salute? I turned to her. Do you ever stop? She looked surprised. Stop what? Talking down to people who actually do something real. She narrowed her eyes. You think flying planes makes you better than me? I think you never got over the fact that I never needed your approval. Her lips tightened, but she didn't respond. Probably the first moment of silence from her since the gate. Another jolt harder this time. The plane tilted slightly left. Not a normal bank. A correction. Then I heard something I hadn't expected. A choked cough through the intercom. Then silence. Then the emergency lighting kicked on, and in that half-second of power flicker, I saw the expression on Leona's face change. The arrogance was gone. The confidence drained. She looked like everyone else, scattered. And I was already unbuckling my seatbelt. A sudden jolt threw coffee cups from the tray tables. The entire cabin lurched downward, and for a moment gravity felt like it had a grudge. Shouts and gasps mixed into a low cacophony. Masks dropped, oxygen hissed. I caught sight of the man in the Nuggets hoodie gripping his daughter's hand until his knuckles went white. The flight attendant's practiced calm evaporated. She grabbed the intercom microphone. Mayday, mayday! Engine 2 fire crew to cockpit. Her voice quivered on the last word. Leona's eyes went wide. That doesn't sound minor. On the overhead panel, the ECAM lights flickered red. I recognized the codes. Fire and 2 overhead, hydraulic fail. None of it was good. By the time I processed what they meant, the plane tilted again hard. A sharp explosion echoed from the right wing. A whoo of hot air flooded through the cabin vents, carrying burnt metal and frustration. The aisle carpet lifted slightly as airflow reversed. Someone screamed. In the cockpit, the co-pilot was struggling with the fire handle. He yanked it, and the engine checklist printed out from a small slot in the panel. Pages fluttered. The captain's voice crackled through the static. Brace for possible decompression, then nothing more. The intercom cut out. I stood up. The straps of my dress uniform held me back for a second before I cleared them. The attendant turned toward me, eyes pleading. "Please, can you help?" I nodded. "Show me the way." She led me through the chaos. Drinks sloshed off carts. A child vomited quietly in an aisle seat. Passengers held onto overhead bins. The man in the Nuggets hoodie stumbled past his daughter, calling, "Dad!" But she didn't dare move. I reached the cockpit door and knocked. No answer. I tried the handle. It was unlocked. I stepped inside. The scene hit me like a wave. Warning horns blared. Panels glowed crimson. The captain was slumped over the controls, his mask dangling at an odd angle. The co-pilot was still upright, but pressed against the sidewall, one hand on the yoke, the other clutching his throat. He looked up at me, fear flashing in his eyes. I can't clear it, the fire's spread, systems fried. I moved to the secondary yoke. "Stand back." He scrambled away. I pulled on the mask, clipped it to my harness. The captain twitched. I tapped his shoulder. "You okay?" He shook his head, eyes unfocused. The co-pilot pointed at the checklist printer. "Engine out procedure." I grabbed the printout, skimmed code names, hydraulic bypass, manual gear deployment, alternate trim switch. My military training clicked in each step of verse I knew by heart. Leona stumbled in behind Get Me the Pilot in seat 14 me, clutching the doorframe. "What are you doing here?" I ignored her. I didn't have time for family therapy. The plane was banking left, altitude dropping. I could feel the nose dipping below the horizon. Instruments flashed warnings. "Honey, do something," she whispered. Her tone had shifted from smug to desperate. I flipped the selector switch to manual hydraulics. The yoke stiffened. I braced myself, pressed forward gently, then eased back. The engines snarled in protest, but the bank listened. I read the altitude, 32,000 FT and falling fast. I keyed the push-tow talk. "Mayday, this is Kodiak's on 14. Engine 2 fire. Captain incapacitated. Request priority vector to nearest diversion airfield." My voice cut through static. Silence, then a crackle. "Kodiak's, this is Madrid Center. Roz's area strip is 150 mi southwest. Approved glide approach. Confirm altitude and heading." I repeated the numbers and switched channels. Leona leaned in close. "Are we going to die?" I turned to her. "Not on my watch." She blinked. "You're serious about this, aren't you?" I didn't indulge her. I returned to the controls. Theco pilot's face was pale. I offered him a nod. He stumbled out and helped the flight attendant secure loose items. I glanced down at the passengers. They were a mess. Pale faces, trembling hands, but they were still breathing. The plane was quieter now, the whining engines replaced by the hum of life support. It felt surreal. Rows of strangers trapped together by disaster. I adjusted the trim manually. Felt the cabin shift. Checked heading. Checked glide ratio. I visualized the runway. 1,000 FT of concrete in the middle of scrubland. No room for error. I tapped my thigh. Leona watched with wide eyes. That's when she realized I wasn't a toy soldier. I was exactly what the captain needed. The plane shuddered again, this time like an animal testing its strength. I leaned into the yoke and held it steady. No second geeing, not theatrics, just action. The cockpit door slammed shut behind me as the plane hit another pocket of dead air. It dropped just enough to make your stomach jump, but I stayed locked in place. My hands were steady on the yoke. I didn't even blink. "Who the hell are you?" the first officer barked. "Cassidy Wynn." I said, "U.S. Air Force, currently active, 1,400 flight hours, cleared for multi-engine military aircraft." He stared at me like he'd just been handed a lifeline he wasn't sure he deserved. "You're the one from seat 14? I nodded once. "That's right," he exhaled. Thank God. He slid over. His hands were shaking. The smell of panic was thick in the air. Sweat, ozone, whatever burned out in the panel behind us. The primary flight display was glitching. We had limited telemetry, one engine completely out, and a partially responsive hydraulic system. But I'd flown worse in war zones. Still, commercial aircraft don't behave like fighter jets. They don't dive, flip, or claw their way through chaos. They lumber. They resist. Every move has to be calculated with margins so tight that mistakes become headlines. I worked fast, checking status indicators, switching backup systems, toggling fuel distribution. Most of it was muscle memory. Behind me, I could hear murmuring in the forward cabin, people asking what was happening, whispered prayers, and then that voice. "She's not the pilot," Leona said loudly to the flight attendant near the curtain. "She's not certified for this. She's military, that's not the same. It's not even legal." The attendant tried to quiet her, but she kept going. "This is insane. You're trusting a woman with PTSD and a combat record to land a passenger jet." I didn't respond. I kept working. "She's not even a real pilot," Leona said. "She's a toy soldier playing dress-up." The co-pilot flinched. I could tell he was waiting to see how I'd react. I didn't give him the satisfaction. I locked in our altitude, adjusted the trim, and confirmed the remaining engine was still stable. She saved our descent vector. He, taking control with military precision, said finally, as if defending me. Without her, we would have dropped like a rock. That shut her up, at least for a moment. I clicked the intercom. "This is Cassidy Wynn, United States Air Force. I've assumed co-control of this aircraft. The captain is unresponsive. We are stabilizing and diverting to an alternate airfield. Stay calm and stay seated." The plane was quiet for the first time in 20 minutes. I glanced over at the co-pilot. "You good?" He nodded. "Better now, but you'll need to fly Iton." I don't trust the stick response. It's inconsistent. I took a breath. That meant the landing would be mine. The longer we stayed in the air, the more likely the fire in Engine 2 could destabilize the entire right side system, and the airfield we were headed to wasn't built for planes this size. The margin was razor thin. I adjusted heading and rechecked the backup comms. Azor Center was still tracking us. I gave them altitude and expected ETA. They cleared a strip and confirmed rescue crews would be standing by. "Cass," Leona said, her voice suddenly close behind me. I turned slightly. She had pushed past the curtain and was now standing just outside the cockpit door, arms crossed, eyes wide. "You're really doing this?" I looked at her for maybe a second too long. "Yes, and I need you to get back to your seat." But number the tone in my voice stopped her. She blinked like she didn't recognize me. Maybe she didn't. Maybe the sister she thought she could manipulate into silence had finally gone quiet for a reason. She didn't speak again. She backed up slowly, then turned and walked away. I returned my focus to the controls. The aircraft was holding at 28,000 ft. Engine 1 was showing signs of pressure loss, but still stable for now. The cabin was calm, oxygen flowing, masks off. People were holding hands, crying quietly, clutching whatever faith they had left. I wasn't flying a jet. I was flying 300 lives held together by hope, steel, and whatever was left in that engine. The first thing I did was kill the autopilot. It wasn't doing much anyway. The system was bouncing between inputs, trying to compensate for engine loss with data that didn't make sense anymore. We were flying wounded barely, but still flying. The yoke pushed back like it was insulted, heavy, sluggish. Every movement had to be deliberate. The co-pilot sat beside me, fingers hovering over switches, eyes flicking to backup gauges every 2 seconds. His name tag said Stokes. He looked mid-30s, decent posture, zero poker face. "I've got a visual on the approach strip at McLaren Field," he said. "Wind strong from the north, landing downhill." "How short's the runway?" I asked. 6,100 ft. Too short for a 777 with full fuel. "Unless we dump," he replied. "Already in progress," I nodded, crossfeet open. "Fuel's bleeding slow through the right tank." He glanced at the gauge, did a rough mental calc, and gave me a tight nod. "You sure about this number?" "Me neither." We didn't need to say more. In the military, that's what trust looks like. Admitting the odds suck and doing the job anyway. I tilted his tutor right, dropping into a controlled descent toward the edge of Newfoundland's airspace. Through the windshield, the coast looked like a dark gray smear under a thick layer of cloud. Not welcoming, but possible. Stokes cleared his throat. You want to brief the cabin? I glanced at him. They'll feel what's coming before they need to hear it. He cracked a smile. Barely, but it was there. We passed through 22,000 FT. The nose dropped a bit too fast, so I eased back, compensating manually. The left engine groaned more vibration than thrust. Not good, but not failure. Yet, the cockpit lights dimmed again, and I heard another relay click in the panel behind us. Auxiliary power transfer. The aircraft was stripping away anything it didn't absolutely need just to keep us flying. You ever landed a bird this size? Stokes asked, half curious. No, I said honestly. But I've landed fighters missing wings, power, and part of a tail. He grunted. Fair trade. I leveled us off at 14,000 FT, then banked northeast. McLaren was 37 mi out and barely visible on radar. I opened the secondary comms channel and hailed their tower. McLaren Tower, this is glide mode activated. No room for error, Skybridge 372. Aircraft is Boeing 777 with partial engine failure. Captain unresponsive. Alternate pilot in command. Request emergency landing clearance. There was a pause then. Skybridge 372, this is McLaren. You are cleared. Emergency crews standing by. Winds variable 7 knots. Runway 17 is lit and cleared. Be advised, field length is not rated for your class of aircraft. Understood, I replied. We'll make it fit. Stokes blinked, then snorted. You always talk like that. I grinned only when I'm pretending I'm not freaking out. We started the approach. Speed 230 knots. Altitude 10,500 FT, fuel still too heavy but manageable. Cabin pressure holding? Passengers silent. I imagined Leona sitting in 14 ampere, clutching her handbag like it had the answers. Maybe wondering if I was going to kill us all. Maybe realizing I was her best shot at not ending up a headline. The runway came into sight barely. A Thingray line cut through pine trees and fog. The kind of landing zone you'd never aim for unless the alternative was worse. Gear down, I called. Stokes hit the switch. The landing gear groaned, hesitated, then locked. I kept one hand on the throttle, the other on the yoke. Every tiny vibration told a story, and I listened to all of them. We dropped to 5,000 FT, still too fast. I eased back the power again, letting gravity do its job. The engines coughed and the plane wobbled, but it held. Stokes said quietly, We might not stop in time. We will, I said. He didn't argue. The windshield was streaked with mist now. Ground proximity warnings pinged like anxious birds. The cockpit lit up with caution lights, none of which told us anything we didn't already know. This bird wasn't meant to be here, but we were bringing it in anyway. As we crossed 1500 FT, I glanced once at the dead captain, still slumped in his chair, oxygen mask, askew, face pale as parchment. Stokes caught my look. I'll call it, he said. No, I said, let me. I adjusted the trim again. The plane didn't respond the way it should have. Too heavy, too slow to bleed altitude, too much drag and one good engine working overtime. Stokes double-checked the speed. We're still hot. Now, I said. I'm trying to hold flare range without stalling. The ground was rushing up now, way too close for comfort. The approach angle was ugly. We were barely clearing a line of fir trees that looked way too tall for a field this size. I tapped the rudder and dipped us just slightly left. The landing gear creaked. The stick vibrated in my hands. I've flown in combat zones with missile lock on my tail. I've made carrier landings in the rain with half a cockpit. But this was different. There's no bailout option in a 777 full of civilians. No ejection seat, no doovers. This was either going to work or become a crater on the evening news. Flaps full, I said. Stokes flipped the switch. We're losing lift. Good, I muttered. We need drag more than we need glide. The runway was in full view now. It looked like a driveway. Stokes was doing mental math out loud. We need full reverse thrust and max braking the second we hit. We've got maybe 5 seconds of margin before we overshoot. Noted. I said, brace for impact call. Do it! I reached for the PA and hit the switch. This is the flight deck. Brace. Repeat. Brace for impact. Behind the cockpit, I could hear the ripple of movement as 300 people curled into the crash position. Belts pulled tighter. People clutched hands, whispered names, made promises no one would hear. Leona's face flashed through my mind for half a second. I pictured her bracing against the seat, clutching her purse like it could buy her way out of gravity. Then I shut the thought down. We were below 800 FT, Stokes muttered. Speed still high? I'm aware. Any ideas? One terrifying. Yes, do it. I pitched the nose slightly higher, riding the air like a stubborn wave. The wind shear bucked us hard, jolting the fuselage, but I kept the angle. The computer screamed at me. Stall imminent. I ignored it. At 300 FT, I cut throttle on the live engine. Full idle, no thrust. You just killed the 300 lives, one silent decision engine, Stokes said, alarm rising in his voice. I just forced glide mode. I corrected. If we flare too hard on power, we bounce. If we bounce, we lose roll control. If we lose roll control, we cartwheel. He stared. You're insane. Yep. The ground screamed toward us, a limpter ticking down like a bomb. 100 P. Whoosher, whooshy, hold, I whispered. Wheels touched, slammed. The cabin jolted like we'd hit a wall. The tail slammed down hard but didn't drag. The tires screamed. I pulled back hard on the yoke while Stokes yanked the reverse thrust toggles. One engine gave us drag. The other gave us smoke. The brakes kicked in, jerking us forward. We were eating runway like a starving dog. Trees at the end were getting too big, too close. Still fast, Stokes shouted. Keep it down, I snapped. We're not done, no. I held the yoke steady as the end of the runway loomed up fast. No shoulder, no extra pad, just a gravel edge and a wall of trees. We were still doing 70 knots. I locked my jaw and kept the plane dead center. We hit a bump, the left side dipped, the right gear squealed. Then we slowed hard. Stokes hit the brake assist, and the plane finally came to a full stop just a few feet before the edge. Silence. Pure electric silence. No more engine noise. No alarms, just breathing. Lots off it. Heavy, unfiltered relief from 300 human lungs. Then the cabin erupted. Some people sobbing, others shouting, but most just stunned like they hadn't processed what just happened. I looked over at Stokes. His face was white, hands trembling. He blinked twice, then laughed once, loud and sharp. You actually did it. I didn't answer. My hands were still gripping the controls. He reached out and gently peeled them off. Outside the windshield, the emergency crews were sprinting down the tarmac. Lights flashing, fire suppression vehicles, EMTs, local law enforcement, a couple guys in reflective vests who looked like they hadn't expected to be part of any miracle today. I sat back and exhaled. Finally, behind us, the cockpit door opened slowly. A flight attendant peeked in, face pale. Is it over? Landing's done, I said. Rescue's yours. She nodded, teary-eyed. As she left, Stokes gave Emmy a sideways glance. You ever consider commercial aviation? I shook my head. Not dramatic enough. I pulled off the headset, finally aware of how loud everything had been. Inside the cockpit, it was dead quiet now. The kind of quiet that doesn't feel peaceful, just paused like the whole world was holding its breath, waiting to decide how it should feel. Then the first scream came from somewhere in the back. A sharp, high-pitched burst that didn't sound like fear anymore. It sounded like release. More followed. Voices crying, cheering. Some clapped. Others sobbed uncontrollably. One guy in row 6 stood up and shouted, "We're alive! We freaking made it!" The cabin door opened again. Another flight attendant stepped in, shaking like she'd just finished a marathon in a thunderstorm. She looked at me wide-eyed, then blinked a few times. You landed the plane," I nodded, still gripping the armrest. She looked stunned. "I thank you. I don't think anyone even knows what just happened." "Good," I said, standing up. "They don't need to know yet." I stepped into the cabin. Every head turned. Some people clapped instinctively, others looked confused. Leona stood up slowly in 14 ampere, her face unreadable. She looked around like someone had played a trick on her. "You?" she asked loud enough for half the cabin to hear. "You actually did it?" I didn't stop walking. Yes, I did. I checked the passengers along the aisle. Some had cuts from flying luggage. Others just looked dazed, like their brains were still in the air. The guy in the Nuggets hoodie from earlier made eye contact with me, then gave a slow, sincere nod. No words, the cabin went quiet after the landing, just gratitude. The teenager beside him whispered, "Thank you," and held her dad's hand like she didn't plan to let go anytime soon. I nodded back, then kept moving. We were still in a live emergency. No way to know if the gear was damaged or if the brakes were shot or if something else would go wrong before they got everyone off. Outside, fire trucks were circling. One had already parked by the left wing. Men in yellow suits jogged out, unspooling hoses. The rear emergency door opened, a hiss of pressure, then air cold, damp Newfoundland air. Passengers started moving slow and shaky. The crew guided them, trying to count heads, check for injuries, direct people down the inflatable slides. Someone pulled out their phone and pointed it at me. It turned my head before they could hit record. The last thing I wanted was to be someone's viral hero of the week. Leona caught up to me near the front galley, her heels clicking unevenly against the metal floor. "You had no right," she snapped. "You weren't even supposed to be in that cockpit." "That's two." "You're welcome," I said, not slowing down. "This isn't how the chain of command works, Cassidy," she barked. "There are laws, protocols. There are also 300 people alive," I replied, "which is more than you've ever saved from anything." Her mouth opened, then closed again. For once, she had no comeback. A little boy in a NASA t-shirt walked by, holding his mom's hand. He looked up at me and whispered, "Are you a real pilot?" I crouched down. "The realest kind, Mike." He gave me a thumbs up. So sincere it actually hurt a little. I helped a woman in her 70s shuffle toward the front exit. She kept mumbling something about her daughter and grandchildren. Her hands were trembling, but she was smiling. By the time I stepped off the plane and hit the tarmac, my legs felt like someone else's ulcers. I looked back once, just once. The jet sat like a wounded animal. One engine still smoking, one wing dipped lower than it should have been, but it was upright, intact, full of people who were never supposed to walk away from this. A paramedic handed me a blanket. I didn't need it, but I took it anyway. Habit. The field was chaos. Flashing lights, EMTs checking passengers, local media swarming past the security perimeter. Someone tried to shove a microphone in my face. I turned away. Leona wasn't far behind. She stepped down the mobile stairs like she expected applause. None came. She walked over, fixing her hair, trying to reassemble her image. "What are you going to do now?" she asked coldly. "Start taking credit. I'm going to make sure everyone gets medical clearance," I said. "Then I'm getting on a call with Air Force Command." "Of course," she said. "Run back to your toys." I looked at her. "You know," I said calmly, "you called me a toy soldier." She crossed her arms. "Because you are." "Then it's a hell of a thing," I said. "That a toy just saved your life." She stared at me like I'd slapped her. Then she turned and walked away. I didn't follow. The news van showed up before the adrenaline wore off. I was sitting on the tarmac with a space blanket still wrapped around my shoulders when the first lens turned in my direction. They didn't ask questions right away. They didn't need to. The image was enough. Boots on the concrete, hands still trembling slightly, hair windblown, and eyes red from focus, not tears. That didn't stop the headlines from writing themselves. Mystery woman lands passenger jet after captain collapses. Pilot in seat 14, who is she? Combat veteran pulls off impossible landing. I didn't speak to anyone. Didn't give a soundbite. Didn't smile. I was still running checklists in my head. What could have gone worse? What I missed? What I didn't miss but came too close to? A crew chief from the Canadian response team approached. "Ma'am, we're transporting the passengers to a holding hangar for medical checks and statements. Can we get your info for incident reporting?" I handed over my military ID without a word. He glanced down, then up. "You really did land that thing?" I nodded. He gave a low whistle, then walked away, shaking his head. Behind me, the 777 still sat like a bruised whale. Tail from hero to headline, the investigation begins heavy, listing slightly, but in one piece. The right engine had melted clean through part of the NL. That alone should have taken us down, but it hadn't. Leona passed by me without a glance. She was on the phone, probably already talking to a lawyer or a PR firm. Her jacket was spotless. Her makeup's still perfect. Her expression nothing, like none of this had touched her. But it had. I'd seen it in her eyes when the plane jolted the first time. She was afraid. Not for the passengers, not for the crew, for herself. A few hours later, after statements and blood pressure checks and cold sandwiches and folding chairs, they let us all leave the field. I didn't ask where they were taking us. At a local hotel booked last minute for stranded passengers, I finally checked my phone, missed calls, messages, emails, and one video. The clip had already gone viral. Someone had filmed Leona during the flight right after the intercom announcement when I took the cockpit. Her voice rang out clear as day, sneering. "She's not even a real pilot. She's a toy soldier playing dress up." The comments weren't kind. Thousands of replies, all ripping her apart. People demanding her name, calling her a coward, a snob, worse. For the first time in 20 years, the world saw Leona the way I always had. Sharp, smug, and just a little too cruel. I put the phone down and stared at the ceiling. I didn't feel proud. I didn't feel vindicated. I just felt quiet. By morning, Air Force liaison officers had arrived. So did corporate reps from the airline. They said a lot of words like protocol, liability, unprecedented situation. What they didn't say was, "Thank you." Didn't matter. I wasn't there for thanks. I was there to make sure no one spun this story into a disaster that didn't happen. I gave my formal report, walked them through every second from engine loss to touchdown. They asked if I'd been cleared to assume control. I was qualified, I said. That wasn't the question. I didn't ask for permission, I replied. I saved lives, they wrote that down. The investigation started immediately. Not into the engine failure that was expected. Machines fail. But into me, into how I inserted myself. Whether I was emotionally sound, whether I had violated any laws by taking command without airline authority. Leona didn't say a word during the entire debrief. She sat at the far end of the room, arms folded, legs crossed, jaw locked. I could feel her staring at me the whole time. When it ended, I walked past her without looking. She didn't move. Outside, a small group of journalists waited behind barriers. One shouted, "Captain Wynne, are you a hero or a liability?" I kept walking, not because I didn't have an answer, but because their question told me they'd already made up their minds. I didn't expect the first bullet to come from the Department of Transportation. 2 days after the landing, I was sitting in a temporary Air Force housing unit near the base in Gander, sipping lukewarm coffee and reviewing my own statement when the official notice landed in my inbox. Subject: Incident Inquiry, Unauthorized Assumption of Flight Controls, Civilian Aircraft. Below it, a long string of agency names, half of which I hadn't heard from since officer school: FAA, NTSB, JAG. Even the damn TSA had something to say. I closed the laptop slowly, set my mug down, and exhaled through my nose. So this was how it was going to go. No medal, no handshake, no banner, just forms, hearings, and doubts dressed up like protocol. I wasn't surprised. This wasn't the first time a woman in uniform had done something extraordinary and been met with suspicion instead of respect, but it still hit harder than I wanted to admit. Across the room, a knock on the door. A young Air Force lieutenant stepped in. Nervous posture, clipboard, too many pens. "Captain Wynne." "Yeah. You're requested at the base conference room in 15 minutes. Air Mobility Command and FAA have joined the call. Legal team will be present. I exposing the family betrayal stood. Anyone from public affairs?" "Yes, ma'am. And someone from civilian relations." They want to talk about messaging. Of course they do. And 15 minutes later, I was in a fluorescent-lit room with 5 people in uniform, 3 civilians in suits, and a video screen full of government faces. They asked questions for an hour. Why did I enter the cockpit? Did I know the captain was incapacitated? Had I received permission from the airline? Was I emotionally stable during the incident? Was there any history of PTSD, impulse issues, disciplinary flags? I answered everything directly, calmly, with no apologies. Yes, I entered the cockpit because the first officer requested assistance. Yes, I took control when he could no longer manage solo approach. No, I'm not commercial rated, but I am a decorated military pilot with over 1,500 flight hours in active duty flight clearance. One woman from the FAA leaned forward and asked, Why didn't you wait for ground instruction? Why assume command without clearance from airline operations? Because airline ops weren't on the plane, I said, but 300 people were. They didn't like that answer. Across the room, the Air Force liaison cleared his throat. With respect, Captain W.'s actions align with Article 5 of the Emergency Authority Clause under DoD Field Directive 17A. In the absence of functioning chain of command, she responded under duty to protect life, property, and safety. The civilian in the gray blazer frowned. She still superseded airline authority. I mean, if she also prevented a catastrophic loss of life. The liaison replied flatly. The room stayed quiet for a long time. After the call ended, a man from the airline's legal team approached me privately in the hallway. "You've made us very nervous," he said. I raised an eyebrow. Nervous like lawsuits. Nervous like headlines. "There's footage of your sister insulting you mid-flight. It's viral. I've seen it. She's a known figure," he added. "Big investment circles, high profile. A public scandal could cause damage to both sides." "You mean to her reputation?" I said. He didn't answer. Just gave a weak corporate smile and said, "We're hoping this can resolve quietly." It wouldn't, not anymore. By the next morning, 3 talk shows had picked up the story. The angle varied depending on which network you watched. Veteran hero saves flight after engine failure. Unqualified soldier hijacks plane in midair. Pilot or liability. The Cassidy Wynn dilemma. End of chapter. The last one stung. Not because it surprised me, but because it came with a panel of smug anchors dissecting my mental health like it was a spreadsheet. One even said, "These military types carry a lot of baggage." Another replied, "Well, clearly she wanted the attention." Leona didn't give an interview. She didn't need to. Her friends in finance were doing the PR cleanup for her. Subtle leaks to the press. Family drama behind cockpit chaos. Insider claims tension on planes stemmed from inheritance battle. They painted me like a ticking time bomb with daddy issues and a uniform. They didn't mention the 300 people still breathing because I refused to freeze. I was summoned back to give a second statement. This one focused on mental health screening, past trauma, emotional regulation under duress. The room was colder this time. They asked me if I'd ever experienced hallucinations, combat flashbacks, intrusive thoughts. I stared at the wall for a moment. Then I answered, "Number." But I have experienced watching a room full of people try to turn survival into scandal. They didn't write that part down. After the meeting, I stepped outside alone. Cold air, overcast sky, the kind of wind that cuts through uniforms and pride alike. Across the tarmac, I saw a little girl being helped into a van by her mother. She looked back at the plane, then up at me. She waved. I waved back. Not for her, for myself, to remind me I was still here, still grounded, still standing. I sat cleared of blame, but not forgotten across from my lawyer. Arms folded, the clip of Leona mocking me, looping silently on his laptop screen. The audio was crystal clear. She's not even a real pilot. She's a toy soldier playing dress-up. He let it play twice, then paused. "Cass," he said, "they're trying to bury you with this." I leaned forward. "So, dig deeper." He blinked. "Into what?" "Into everything." I said my records, her records, our father's will, the trusts, the company paperwork. She's not just trying to humiliate me. She's covering something. That word again, covering. For years I thought Leona's cruelty was just emotional, passive-aggressive digs, backhanded praise, dismissive looks at holidays. But this wasn't pettiness. This was strategy. "Start with the inheritance," I added. Dad's estate went into a blind trust when he got sick, but I never saw the disbursement records. My lawyer nodded, already typing. 2 days later, I had documents in hand. Everything I suspected was true and worse. Leona hadn't just manipulated Dad's legal decisions in his final year. She'd restructured the family holdings through a proxy firm. Carrick Trust Management, buried under 6 shell companies, was my name removed, scrubbed, replaced with language that declared mentally unstable, unfit to manage assets, and a risk to fiduciary continuity. I stared at the paper. "Where'd she get that language?" I asked. My lawyer scrolled. "Here's the kicker. This clause was added years ago. Same month, Your Air Force file flagged that concussion from the G-Force incident during training. It blinked. That was minor. I passed all post-flight evals. She got a hold of the unredacted medical report, spun it as evidence of psychological impairment, then used it to quietly remove you from decision-making power. I swallowed hard. Dad signed off on it. Technically, yes. But the notary's signature fake. It was digitally stamped by someone no longer licensed in the state of Virginia. He slid the document toward me. It was all there in black and white. My own sister had used a training injury and forged documents to erase me from the family legacy and from Dad's final years. I remembered the phone calls she blocked, the hospice visits she said weren't good for my image. The legal updates she swore didn't concern me. She didn't want me around because she'd already erased me on paper. I closed the folder slowly, then looked at my lawyer. "Can we take this public?" "We can do better," he said. "We can subpoena her." Back at my temporary quarters, I opened a secured laptop and pulled up my military case file. Attached to it, surveillance logs, emails, even the contractor access logs for the Carrick Trust accounts. Turns out Leona wasn't careful. One of the shell companies had routing data that bounced through a VPN badly. Whoever managed the system left metadata behind, and one IP address traced back to an executive suite in Chicago, leased by Leona's firm. She didn't just steal control, she left a trail. I made copies, all of it, printed 3, encrypted 2, burned 1 to a hard drive. The next morning, I walked into a federal investigator's office with a file the size of a brick. "This is everything I said. Financial manipulation, fraud, medical defamation, and breach of fiduciary duty." He didn't blink. Just took the file and said, "We've been waiting for this." News hit the next week. Leona Wynn, majority board member of Halberg Financial, was under federal review. Words like fraudulent Freeman skies, a new mission begins, inheritance maneuvering, and strategic psychological discrediting made their way into the press. For once, she had nothing to say. At the same time, the FAA and Department of Defense released a joint report on the flight incident. Conclusion: Captain Cassidy Wynn acted within reasonable emergency authority. No violation of aviation law occurred. It was over officially. No charges, no censure, no apology either, but I never expected one. I was reinstated on active flight duty, but something had changed in me. I wasn't angry anymore, not the way I used to be. I was focused. I requested a reassignment, advisory role, pilot mentorship, outreach for women in aviation. The Air Force granted it within a week. 2 days later, I got a letter, not an email, a real folded envelope with cream stock and blue ink. It was from one of the passengers, a woman named Trish, mother of 3, seat 28D. She wrote, "My youngest had just turned 5. We were flying back from our first family vacation in years. If you hadn't taken that yoke, none of us would have made it. You didn't just land a plane, you saved a family." I put the letter on my desk and didn't touch it for a long time. I didn't cry. I just sat there and let the silence settle. Not the silence of trauma, the silence of something over, something clean. I didn't show up for the board meeting, but my presence was felt in every line of the report. The file was delivered to Halberg Financial's general counsel at exactly 900 a.m. Hard copy only, per protocol. Inside were copies of every document Leona signed, edited, or concealed. Every transaction routed through shell firms, every forged notary, and a summary affidavit from a forensic analyst confirming the metadata links between her company and Carrick Trust Management. The board took exactly 11 minutes to call an emergency session. I wasn't there, but I didn't need to be. People like Leona don't fall with fireworks. They unravel in silence, under pressure, behind closed doors when there's no audience to charm. By the end of the day, her name was gone from the executive page. By the end of the week, Halberg filed a motion to separate her assets from the primary trust, citing loss of confidence in internal governance. They didn't call it fraud, they called it a reputational issue. That's how the powerful lose quietly and without ceremony. Back at the base, I was clearing out my temporary locker when a young airman stopped me. "Captain Wynn." "Yeah, there's someone waiting for you in the office, civilian." I raised an eyebrow. "Did they give a name?" He nodded. "Leona Wynn." I thought about walking away, just leaving her there in the hallway like she'd done to me at Dad's hospice. But curiosity won. She stood in front of the bulletin board, arms folded, phone off for once. No entourage, no makeup team, just her, raw, tired, exposed. She turned as I walked in. "I figured you'd be gone by now," she said. "Not kite. I heard you're taking the advisory post." I said nothing. She nodded slowly. "That's good. You're good at training, focused, predictable, teachable." I didn't reply. She glanced at the floor, then back up. "So, this is what you wanted?" Revenge, that word. I walked past her, picked up my flight binder, slid it into my duffel, then zipped it shut. When I turned around, I looked her dead in the eye. I wanted my name cleared, my father's trust restored, and 300 people alive. That's not revenge. That's responsibility. She flinched just barely, but it was real. "You humiliated me," she said, her voice brittle. "No," I said. "You did that yourself." I just stopped covering for it. She opened her mouth, then closed it. The silence between us stretched. The air felt heavy with every unspoken decade of our lives. She reached into her bag and handed me a small envelope. No name, no logo, just the final flight log and silent victory thick ivory paper. I didn't open it. "Is this your version of an apology?" "It's a withdrawal," she said. "From the estate, from the trust. I'm signing over my shares." I didn't say thank you. I didn't need to. "You'll do what you want with it," she added. "I assume something noble?" "You assume correctly." "Hola," she gave a tight smile. The kind of smile people practice in boardrooms. The kind that never touches the eyes. "I'll be in Europe for a while," she said, cleaning up the mess. I nodded. "Seems like a full-time job." She laughed short, bitter. Then, almost involuntarily, she said, "I didn't think you'd land it." "I know." She stared at me for a long second. "I don't hate you," she said. "I'm not here for your forgiveness," I replied. She stepped past me. No handshake, no embrace, no final word. And that, I realized, was the apology. Not because she said it, but because she didn't. 2 weeks later, I stood on a tarmac in Arizona, watching a dozen young women step out of a shuttle van. Their faces were nervous, excited, curious. They didn't know they were my first class. The patch on their bags read, "Wind Flight Institute, Women in Air Leadership," funded entirely by my half of the estate. Each one of them had been selected from underrepresented communities, first-generation students, veterans transitioning to civilian careers, women who'd been told no more times than they could count. One stepped up and saluted. "Ma'am, Cadet Alvarez reporting." I returned the salute. "Welcome to the sky." That night, I sat alone on the airfield's training deck, watching the sun burn down behind the runway. My phone buzzed. A message from one of the passengers. It was a photo of her and her daughter standing in front of a new house. The caption read, "Alive because of you." I didn't reply. I just stared at the photo and let the silence speak for me. No press conference, no interview, no viral moment, just truth and peace. One of the girls stalled on her first takeoff. The nose pitched up too hard and the trainer plane wobbled awkwardly above the tarmac, engine whining like it was begging for stability. I watched from the control tower, headset on, eyes narrowed. "Cadet, ease your grip. You're flying, not fighting it," I said calmly over the radio. There was a pause. Then her voice came back tight and shaky. "Copy that," she adjusted. The plane leveled. A second later, the gear lifted off clean, and just like that, another one flew. Behind me, one of the instructors whistled low. "You think she'll stick with it?" "If she doesn't," I said, "it won't be because someone told her she couldn't." The Wind Flight Institute was 6 weeks into its first training rotation. 15 cadets. 13 of them had never even touched a real yoke before this program. Now they were banking turns over the desert like they'd been born in the cockpit. And for the first time in years, I wasn't fighting. I wasn't proving anything. I was building. The hangars bore no family name but mine. Not because I needed credit, but because I'd earned the right to put something clean into the world that wasn't stained by Leona's shadow or Dad's legacy or courtrooms or viral videos. Just a name, a direction. The base was quiet at sunrise, my favorite time to walk it. No, but wind and propellers spinning up for drills. The desert air was dry, clean. I liked the silence of it, the lack of judgment. One morning, I was reviewing engine logs in the briefing room when the receptionist tapped my shoulder. "There's someone here for you," she said. I looked up, expecting a donor or recruiter. But instead, I saw a teenage girl, barely 18, standing stiff in the doorway, arms at her side, eyes flicking between pride and fear. She was holding an application packet. "I'm sorry," she said, voice barely above a whisper. "I wasn't sure if I should, but I didn't know who else to ask." "Huh?" I looked at the name on the top of the folder. Morgan Vinn, Leona's daughter. She stepped forward. "I want to earn it. Not because of my last name, not because of her, because I want to fly." I studied her for a long moment. Same cheekbones, same stubborn chin, but the eyes, those were different. Not entitled, not rehearsed, just raw. "What did your mom say about this?" I asked. "She said she wouldn't stop me," Morgan replied. "But she also wouldn't support me. Said if I came here, I'd be on my own." "That true? She cut me off 2 weeks ago." "Why come here?" She took a breath. "Because you're the only person in this family who earned what they have." That stopped me cold. I walked to the desk and took her application. Scanned it. GPA solid. Dossier K letters clean. Motivation letter. Honest. She had the background, the drive, and the guts to walk in here alone. "Orientation starts next month," I said, setting the packet down. "If you make it through the first phase, you'll earn your wings. But no shortcuts." She smiled a little too wide. "Wouldn't expect any." She turned to go, then hesitated. "You think she'll ever talk to me again?" "I don't know," I said honestly. "But I think you'll be okay even if she doesn't." She nodded once and left. That night, I walked the area strip alone again. Clear sky above. Stars stretched over the desert like old wounds that had stopped bleeding. I didn't think much about the plane anymore. Not the explosion, not the pressure drop, not even the landing. But sometimes, just sometimes, I thought about the moment right after when no one clapped and no one panicked and no one said a word. That impossible quiet. That was the moment I knew I had taken back everything they tried to steal from me. Not by fighting louder, by flying higher. The ink bled a little on the corner of the page. Too much heat in the hangar that morning. Too little patience with pens that didn't flow right. I turned to a fresh sheet in my flight journal and smoothed it out. Date instructor Captain Cassidin Tadit Morgan Vinn Le Crosswind Landing Light Turbulence Sim. She did better than I expected. The first time she banked too early, flared too hard. The second time she nailed it. Calm hands, eyes sharp, feet where they belonged. After Whelan did, she looked over at me, breathless. Was that decent? I shrugged, hiding the grin. It didn't kill us. That's always a win. She laughed, nervous but real. I watched her climb out of the cockpit, unzipping the flight suit like she finally believed she belonged in it. It hit me then how full circle this was. The win name on her shoulder wasn't something she borrowed. It was something she earned. Back in the office, I sat at my desk, opened the flight log, and stared at the blank section labeled Instructor Notes. Oh, I didn't write anything for a moment. Just sat with it. 1,000 things had been said about me in the past year. Pilot, hero, fraud, risk, sister, soldier. But none of them stuck the way that one word did in my own handwriting. Instructor. It didn't need defending. It didn't need press coverage or courtrooms. It just needed hours in the air, sweat under pressure, and cadets who came back stronger after every mistake. I started writing. Cadet shows strong instincts under pressure. Still fights the yoke a little in crosswind but adjusts quickly. Clear communicator. Learns fast. Confident without arrogance. Shows restraint under critique. A win but not her mother's kind. I closed the journal and slid it onto the shelf beside the others. 12 logs now. 12 cycles of women stepping into cockpits they were told they'd never touch. 12 rounds of proving skill beats legacy. 12 chances to build what Leona tried to poison. I got up, stretched, and walked outside. It was nearly dusk, the kind of light that makes the desert feel soft around the edges. A few cadets were packing up their gear near the tarmac. I saw Morgan among them laughing with a girl from New Mexico and another from the Bronx. None of them looked like they belonged to the same world, except now they did. The sky overhead was streaked orange and blue. The kind of palette you only get once before the sun drops for good. It reminded me of something an old instructor once said. You don't own the sky. You borrow it briefly every time you earn it. He was right. And today I'd earned it again. Later that night, he sat alone with a glass of water and the original black box transcript from the flight. I kept a copy for myself, not because I needed proof, because I needed perspective. I played back a segment quietly, just ambient noise, a couple alarms, and my own voice saying, "We're going to glide it in." No power, no margin, just air and instinct. Even now I could hear the calm under the tension. Not bravado, just choice. I paused the recording. People think revenge is loud fists on tables, speeches in courtrooms, enemies humiliated. But it's not. The deepest revenge is living well, flying higher, and knowing you no longer need their permission to do either. Leona's voice used to echo in my head every time I stepped into a cockpit. Now it's just noise I don't listen to anymore. And sometimes silence is louder than a lifetime of apologies. The Institute was quiet by midnight. I walked the strip one more time, checked the fuel trucks, touched the nose of the training plane Morgan flew earlier. Same model I trained on back in Georgia. Different call sign now. We named them after women who flew before us. This one was Stone, too. Named after Major Gina Stone, the first woman I saw land a C-17 in a monsoon like it was a golf cart. She retired last year, sent me a card when the Institute opened. Make them better than we were. We were trying. At the edge of the runway, I stopped and looked out. No planes in the air tonight, just the hum of wind across concrete and a low whistle through the fence posts. I reached into my jacket, pulled out the weathered patch from my original flight suit, worn, frayed, nearly torn in half. I didn't sew it onto anything new. I just held it. That patch had seen more than most people's marriages. It had been in war zones, simulators, hospitals, and most importantly, that one cockpit. 40,000 FT above an ocean where no one thought I belonged. I stood there a while, not saying anything. Then I folded the patch and placed it into Asmal box on the bench near the hangar door. Above it, a new plaque, Wynn Flight Institute, founded by Captain Cassidy Wynn. For every girl told she couldn't fly, you already know how to land. You were born to take off. There's a kind of revenge that doesn't need an audience. It's not about taking someone down. It's about rising quietly while they watch and realizing you no longer care if they do. For me, it wasn't about proving Leona wrong. It was about proving to myself that I was never broken, never small, never just a toy soldier. In the end, I didn't destroy my sister. I outgrew her. That's the thing with family revenge stories. The real power isn't in the fight. It's in the freedom that comes after. If you made it this far, thanks for watching. If you enjoy family revenge stories, real-life-inspired revenge stories, or dramatic tales of power, pride, and redemption, make sure to subscribe and drop a comment below. I'd love to hear what you'd do if someone like Leona tried to erase you. Let's talk family loyalty and that sweet, quiet revenge.